wrestling has lost so much stature, so much prominence, so much build as it used to have. It's just not what it used to be, let's be honest. Because a lot of things happen in the Monday Night Wars and all that stuff that was bringing wrestling to the mainstream, to the forefront. The wars of Monday night was what brought wrestling to the dance, so to speak. Because in the 80s, Hulk Hogan he's the only wrestler to be featured on a Sports Illustrated magazine. So the SI actually went to wrestling as a legit sport. And then it built up to, it's basically around Hogan that everything in wrestling revolved. And then all the other guys that were good fell in suit. But Hogan was what held it together. And then when the Monday Night Wars started, the thing that made it great in WWE's standpoint was Jim Ross. Because Jim Ross was in NWA during the mid-80s to early 90s, and then he went to WWE. And Jim Ross made WWE what it is because he was like one of the lead writers and one of the people that signed the people. He fired them, he scouted them. He signed Jack Swagger, Undertaker, John Cena, The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Edge, just a plethora of talent that JR brought in, and he had an eye for the business. That's why he was so dedicated to what he was doing out ringside, because he was writing all this and seeing it play out in front of him. That's why it was so dramatic, and JR was a big part of it, because he knew what the fans wanted. He knew what they needed to see. He was the only reason, not Vince McMahon, not anybody else. JR was the reason that WWE stayed afloat, and Eric Bischoff didn't. If Eric Bischoff got Triple H, I think he would still be on TV, legitimately, with WCW, and Vince McMahon would have just fell apart. It's just that simple, because Eric Bischoff was pretty much trained by JR before he left, because JR used to run NWA with Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, so he took his talents to Vince McMahon and had a little insight to what they were doing and what WWE needed to do to stay afloat, because that's what happened, is that Eric Bischoff took off with WCW, and he had Hogan, he had the mainstream guy that was followed, and everybody was watching WCW at the time because they're like, what is Hogan doing? Because for 2 years he was good, and he was fighting Paul White, the Big Show, which was the Giant back then. And he had feuds with Kevin Sullivan and things like that, but it wasn't going anywhere. It was just the same old character. And then when they turned him heel and made him Hollywood, then that just pushed WWE to the back burner. Raw got so bad that they were recording it. It ended up on CMT and TNT, TNN, not TNT, but a country music station. That's how bad it got. USA Network dropped them. They had the Homecoming back in 2007 because it just finally started picking back up. But it was just awful that WWE lost that much money. Mick Foley and Shawn Michaels, they couldn't hold it down. I mean, Mick Foley was good, but it's a shame that WWE was telling the results of Raw on Nitro. Why it got so bad that it was recorded. But JR kept at it, and he was diligent in signing all this talent and writing good storylines, that he finally brought it back, and he brought it back, and then WCW went through a transition to where it was Vince Russo taking over, and that just made it totally ridiculous. I mean, David Arquette, the champion, and Russo writing it, it doesn't make sense. Jim Ross is the one that is responsible for the Attitude Era. He's responsible for writing. He's responsible for all the great stars. You think JR would have had a protege that he was going to train to take over for him when he retired. I mean, he's not retired. He's doing the Legends show. But you think that he would have had somebody lined up to actually take over for what he was supposed to carry on forever, because TNA is starting to gain relevancy, and the crowds are getting bigger. If you haven't noticed, when you're watching TNA, the crowds are almost like borderline above a high school gymnasium to a college gymnasium. Pretty soon they're going to go up to the big arenas, and then it's not going to be so simple for WWE just to shrub them off. They better quit concentrating on their movies, and they better quit concentrating on all the things that they're trying to promote and get advertisers. They better stick to wrestling, because Jim Ross is too old to ride it anymore, and he's not going to be around forever to save them. John Laurinaitis just put the company through hell. That's why everybody's hating this Cena rants and all this stuff. Just Laurinaitis destroyed it. JR needed to train somebody to keep it going, and there's no competition. So, I mean, there's no Monday Night Wars. Why would he have competition when he doesn't have anything to make him feel like he needs to be competitive? But TNA, as the crowds get bigger and the storylines get better, all they need to do, all TNA needs to do to put them over the top, is to see Vince slipping. Like Randy Orton. Why do you think he gets away with what he did? Vince doesn't want Randy Orton going to TNA. That would be an automatic pop. All the Randy Orton fans would go to TNA. And then that would be, I mean, Randy Orton's a big star. If they lost to Randy Orton, or they lost to Sheamus, or a Dolph Ziggler, hell, even Jack Swagger, I mean, if they lost any of their superstars, they would go get a pop in TNA. That's why you see Gail Kim going from TNA to WWE, to back to TNA, back to WWE, back to TNA. Even Booker T went to TNA and honed his skills and came back to WWE and became King Booker. It's just that this is going to really happen to WWE if they don't stop slipping up and stop doing what they're doing. They're going to mess up, and they're going to end up being off of TV. Not really off of TV, but they're going to be back in the situation that they were in back then, and I don't think he can throw around enough money with trying to get Lynn into the Senate or the Congress or whatever he's trying to get her into now. With him losing that much money on that and trying to still get her in there, trying to buy it, he doesn't have enough money to buy out his competition. And TNA and Jeff Jarrett and Dixie Carter and all of them are pissed off anyway because they shut WCW down. If you look at it, TNA is being ran like WCW, and it's going to catch up to them. I predict 5 years from now, TNA will be bigger than WWE, because if they get one of those stars from WWE right now, it will be just perfect. It will happen. Mark my words. I want to thank y'all for watching, and remember, we all have a video camera, we all have internet, and we all have an opinion.